Alright, so what we're going to do today is we'll continue to go over the topics, on here. And I think I have highlighted, this one, the object-oriented way, because in this class it is one of our learning objectives to talk about object-oriented programming, because that's what you need to know for cisp363, the next class. So what I'll do is to relate what we have seen so far with App Inventor to the concepts of object-oriented programming. How many people have some exposure to object-oriented programming already? Okay, so we have quite a few. So it can be from Visual Basic Programming, it can be from Java programming, C++ programming, C#, PHP, Perl. A lot of programming languages are actually object-oriented if you choose to be object-oriented. Because for the most part, being object-oriented is really a way of looking at things. It is not really particular features of a programming language. Now, a feature of a language can support object-oriented programming, but it is not always required. For the most part, it is just how we look at things. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at object-oriented programming in App Inventor. And it has a question mark because a lot of people think of App Inventor as a very limited programming environment, and they say, well, that's not good for object-oriented programming or even the explanation of object-oriented programming. Well, I really kind of disagree with that assessment, and I think it is a great tool for illustrating what is object-oriented programming, at least up to a certain point. Okay, there's no extension of classes or custom classes, but it can still explain some really basic concepts in object-oriented programming. So that's basically the first paragraph here. The first part of this document here starts with what we already know about App Inventor. Instead of reading my notes here, I'm going to switch to App Inventor, so that way I can just point out to you what I'm talking about and just kind of do a quick experiment so that you guys can know what I'm talking about instead of just reading the notes. Okay, well, I'm switching to App Inventor. This particular screen does not have a particular name. It's not called blah 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 editor like the blocks editor. If I switch to the blocks editor, you can see that this one actually has a name. It is called the blocks editor in App Inventor. But the other screen, this one has no particular name. So I'm gonna name that the resources editor, because that's basically what it does, is it allows you to manage the resources of your Android app. Okay, so I'm calling this the resources app, a resources editor. Okay, we have several things, several components in the screen. We'll start from the left and then move our way to the right-hand side. We have done something like this already, but I want to do it again today, but in the context of explaining object-oriented programming concepts. So that's what we'll do today. On the left-hand side, where my mouse pointer is, this is the palette. Okay. The palette is basically, it has drawers. I call these things drawers. So basic is a drawer, media is a drawer, animation is a drawer, social is a drawer. And they're basically ways to organize these potential things that you can put into your app. Okay? But these are only potential things that you can put into your app. In other words, at this point with my test app here, does it have, okay, let me just go back to some really basic stuff. Does it have a button at this point?
No.
No. Does it have a label or image or
Just
canvas?
Screen.
It's just a blank screen. It has no components, right, other than the screen itself. Okay, very good. So that means, all of these things here in the palette, they're potentially something that I can create and put into the application. But as it is, they are not there yet. Okay, are we doing okay so far with that concept that items in the palette are potential items that you can put into your application, but until you drag it into your application, they're not really a part of your application. They're just potentially things that you can have in your application. You're doing okay so far? All right. So what I'll do next is I'm going to drag one of these items, let's say a button, okay, because a button is really common in applications. I'm dragging it into the viewer pane. Okay, the middle part here, this part is called the viewer pane because it is just a portion of the entire editor. The viewer pane and also the components pane, they can display the same type of components but in different sort of way. The viewer pane is what you see, is what you get. It is WYSIWYG. It gives you a certain degree of control of ordering and also positioning of stuff on your screen, and it's a spatial display of what you should see in your app. That's the viewer pane. The components pane, on the other hand, gives you a hierarchical view of what is including what else. Okay, certain types of components are containers. The screen itself is a container because you can put multiple components inside the screen. There are other components that are also containers. If you scroll all the way down to, I think it's in other stuff. No, I take it back. It's in screen arrangement. Horizontal arrangement, table arrangement, and vertical arrangement. Those are containers as well, and they can be nested. Okay, you can have one container inside another container inside another container if that is what you need to organize your screen. Okay, and then on the far right-hand side, we have the properties pane. The properties pane is displaying the properties of whatever component you have selected. At this point, I have selected button 1. You can select a component either from the viewer pane or the components pane. You can click, just click the screen itself, and you can see now, it is the one selected. Or you can click, one of the components, and that will be the one being selected at this point. The properties pane is displaying the properties of the component, whatever component I have selected. So at this point, I have selected button 1 as my component, and as a result, it is displaying the properties of button 1. Button 1 has a background color, and right now I'm using the default background color, which is black. It is enabled, which means somebody can click it. The font is not bold, but I can check mark this, and you can see how the button or the caption on the button has changed, and so on. So these are properties. The property, or each property of a component, is something that is static, okay, that you can change. Well, okay, that doesn't go very well. It is a value, okay? It is a value that you can change over time, or you can just fix it in this particular screen and not change it ever, okay? But it is a value. Are we doing okay so far with the demonstration? Okay, a lot of this stuff you have done already, but I want to kind of give it a slightly different spin today so that we can illustrate concepts of object-oriented programming. All right, so getting back to the notes first, because I want to show you where we are at this point. So we have just talked about the palette. This is basically potential resources or potential components that you can have in your app. But until such time you drag something into the viewer pane, it doesn't create an instance of that particular component. In the components pane, we have components, and also the viewer pane, we can see the current components that we have already created. It is a part of your app. The last part has to do with our blocks editor. The blocks editor actually serves kind of several purposes, but this is where you write your program. In other words, I can just leave this particular project the way it is. Okay, let me switch back to the web browser here. This is an app. I mean, it will definitely run on its own, just like this. Okay, let me just make this a little bit more fun by including another button. Okay, so just drag another button here. Maybe something that's even slightly smarter, like a checkbox. So I'm going to put a checkbox here. I'm not even bothering to change the text here because this app doesn't really serve any particular purpose. So I don't really have any specific name for the buttons and the checkbox. All right, so we'll switch back to the blocks editor screen. Without specifying anything, I'm going to run a new emulator because I'm still having a problem connecting to my Android device here. So that's coming. I'm getting it fixed, but it just takes a little bit more time to get that part done. And this computer is pretty fast. The emulator actually starts up faster than some of the actual Android devices. All right, so we got an Android device up and running. and I'm going to make a connection to it for debugging purposes. Okay. So what this is doing at this point is it's making a connection, but it's actually doing a lot more than that. It is not just making a connection. What App Inventor is doing is it's actually compiling the code. It is looking at the resources of this particular app. It's compiling that, as well as any code. I don't have any here, but any code in the blocks editor will also be compiled at this point. So it will basically send the compiled code to the emulator to run in the emulator. So let's take a look at the emulator. It's still going. And all right, so it's done already. I have my app up and running. All of these things already can do stuff. Okay, what do you mean by doing stuff? If you click on a button, you can see that it changes color, just like a real button does. If you click on the checkbox, it changes its own state. From check, it will toggle from check to uncheck automatically. In other words, without even specifying a single block of action of my own, all of these components have default ways of responding to an end user's clicking. Are we kind of doing okay so far with that concept too? Okay. But what is kind of interesting is if you go to My Blocks, every time you drag a new component into your viewer pane in the resources editor, guess what happens? Under My Blocks, the My Blocks tab of the blocks editor, you will see a new drawer. Every time you add a new component, there will be a new drawer corresponding to that component. When you click on a particular component, like button 1 here, you will see these particular blocks here. Every single block here is either an attribute, a property, or an action that a button, in this case button 1, can perform. So these are, for the most part, actions, things that you can do with a particular component that is already in your app. Are we still doing okay so far with the explanation? So far so good? Yep.
I had trouble connecting to my device.
Your physical device or your emulator?
My emulator.
Okay, we'll do that in the lab time. Okay, we'll do that during the lab time. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to switch back to my notes again, and we are basically done talking about what we already know about App Inventor. It's really just a recap of stuff that we have done already. And what we'll do now is to do a object-oriented programming concept mapping, which means we look at things that we already know in App Inventor, and then we relate those things to object-oriented programming. The first thing about object-oriented programming is you have to understand what is a class. A class is a technical name in object-oriented programming. It has a very specific meaning.
Definition.
Sorry?
Definition.
It's a definition, but it's a little bit more than that. Okay, but you're right. It is a definition of sorts. A class in object-oriented programming is kind of like a template, but do not confuse, the general sense of a template with the C++ specific feature called a template. So we are not we're not talking about the C++ template, but just template as a whole. You can use a template to basically cut out objects. The best analogy I can think of, throughout many years of teaching classes is you can consider a class as a cookie cutter. Okay, does everybody know what a cookie cutter is? Okay, just to be sure, we'll go take a look at what a cookie cutter is. Cookie cutter, and we'll take a look at images. So these are cookie cutters. For those of you who do not make cookies and never step into the kitchen ever once, these are cookie cutters. Okay, they are basically little templates. Okay, and this picture is particularly good, so I'm gonna right click and open a new tab for this one, because it shows you not only the cookie cutter, but what about that brown yellowish stuff next to it? Those are cookies, right? Okay, very good. Let's switch back to the notes here. You may have a single cookie cutter in your drawer, but out of that one single cookie cutter, is there a limitation as to how many cookies you can cut out of it? Use it to cut out? No. What is limiting how many cookies you can cut out?
Amount of material, yeah.
Amount of cookie dough, right? If you run out of cookie dough, then you are out. I mean, you cannot make any additional cookies. Okay, very good. So we are making the distinction between a class and an object already. If I look at this picture here, well, this may not be the best one, but it kind of shows enough. If you look at all the cookies, already in this picture, do you think they share the same shape? Overall speaking, I know they're not exactly the same, but they all look like the cookie cutter itself. Okay. In other words, a class is a concept, a construct in object-oriented programming where you can construct objects of similar shape, so to speak, out of a class. You can stamp things out of it. Okay. Are there any questions about what a class is in object-oriented programming? Okay. If there are no questions, we'll switch to App Inventor. And then I'm going to delete a bunch of stuff first, so we can kind of refresh and start the explanation from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to delete all the components that I have in the app already. And I'm going to switch back to this side here. These are our classes. Every single item in the palette is a class. In other words, those are your cookie cutters. All right? Well, we sure have a lot of cookie cutters, because if you look at each drawer, it has a bunch of cookie cutters, and if you look at media, it has its own cookie cutters in that drawer. You look at animation, it has 2. You look at social, it has 6, and so on. But each one is a class. It is a cookie cutter. How do I cut a cookie? You just drag it. Okay, you drag a cookie cutter into your viewer pane, and that's how we create cookies in App Inventor. So the action of dragging a button from the palette side to the viewer side is creating a cookie. And I can do this as many times as I want, well, up to a certain limit. And I can create many buttons in a particular app. Are we still doing okay so far? Switching back to the explanation, we are now ready to talk about objects. Okay, objects are things that are cut out using classes. In other words, in this case, button 1 and button 2 are objects. They are objects of the class button. Okay, are there any questions about that? Let me slide and shift the view here, so that we can see, well, I only need the components, so I can slide it all the way to the right-hand side. This is button 1. You can see the properties of button 1, and this is button 2. These are the properties of button 2. Do you think they share the same set of properties? Not values, but just the properties.
Yes.
They seem to be identical, right? And that's an attribute of objects created by the same class. Every object that you create from the same class, they have exactly the same properties. Now, what is potentially different is the values of the properties are independent. Okay, so what that means is, even though button 1 has its background color and background 2 has its own background color, you can change one without affecting the other one. So I can go to button 1, change its background color from the default to something that's obvious, magenta. Okay, that's pretty obvious, right? And I can go to button 2 and change that one to something else that's also very contrasting, like green. So now I have 2 buttons. Each one has a property called background color, but the value of that property are different between the 2. This is the same thing as in cookies. When you cut out your cookies, go back to this image here. This is not a really good picture, because the best example to use to illustrate that two cookies can have the same properties but not the same value is the placement of chocolate chips. Okay, if you're making chocolate chip cookies out of using a cookie cutter, what are the chances that the two cookies will have identical distribution of chocolate chips? Pretty much none, right? Because they are independent. So it's the same way with object-oriented programming. Different objects, different objects of the same class, they have the same properties, but the values of each property is independent from each other. Are we doing okay so far with the explanation of objects, especially with properties at this point? Okay, very good. The last part, this is actually two parts in one. Okay, so we just talked about properties. Properties are things that you can set in the resources editor. In other words, if you want the app to start up with green buttons, you can change that. If you want the text to be boldface, we can change it to boldface. If I switch to the emulator, you can see that the app is automatically updated on the other side, and now it has the colors as well as the boldface for button 2 already uploaded. All right. So properties are fairly easy to explain and understand, because they are basically just stuff that will affect certain attributes of an object. What is a little bit harder to explain are what we call methods. A method is basically an action, okay? But it's not just any action. A method is always tied in to an object that is created from a class, okay? So let me just repeat that again. And a method is an action. It's something that your program can do, but it is specific to an object. And that object, all objects have to be created by a class, some class. So they're all tied in. Where do you think I can find methods in App Inventor? Since it's an action, things you can do, where do we find it?
Block editor.
In the blocks editor, exactly. So if I switch to the blocks editor, right here, I can go to my blocks, because every method or every action specific to a particular object is going to be listed under one of the drawers of my blocks. So in this particular case, I'm going to look under, let's say, button 1. Okay. Under button 1, and when I click button 1, I can see all of these blocks here. Many of these are actions. If you just read the code, it has an action word, a verb in it. Like the first one, when button 1 dot click do. Okay. Now, even though when is not an action, you can definitely tell that do is an action. Okay, it is the trigger of a block of code. So do is the action. This one here, button 1 dot background color, by itself it is not an action. Okay, some people actually consider that an action because there's actually a potentially you can say button 1 dot get background color. Okay, so you can actually look at it as an action too because it is getting the value of an attribute for you. Okay, but the next one is definitely an action because it is allowing you, okay, to change the background color to something. Okay, the word set here is an action, it's a verb. Okay. If you look at some of the other components, it is even more obvious. This one is not quite as obvious. Let's take a look at screen. Call, is an action. Trying to look for things that have, very obvious, actions. Let's switch back to the resources editor here, and we'll go to something that has very obvious, actions. Checkbox, clock, label, list picker. I think a text box, has some interesting action. Okay. What do you do with a text box?
Enter data input.
Enter text, right? Well, guess what? I can do it now. as soon as I drag a text box into the viewer, the viewer pane, it will automatically update the emulator. So in the emulator, now I have a text box, and I can type something. Okay, I can say, this is a test. All right, very good. How is this useful in your app? Just the way it is. It's not useful. It's not useful, right? Because even though you have a text box and you can enter text without any additional code, what are you doing with this text? Nothing at this point, right? So depending on what you want to do, some people want to do validation, as you go. Other people want to do some processing, when you're done, typing in the text, okay, when the focus is away. So let's go back to the blocks editor and find out, with the text box, what are the possible actions, okay? The first one here is when text box 1 got focus, do, okay? So this particular event is raised when the component is selected for input, such as by the user touching it. So this is before you type anything, okay? You just select it, make it highlight to make it the current highlighted or the focus of the action, and whatever you want to do, in this block here is going to show up. It will be done as soon as someone clicks on the text box. Okay. Most people do not use this particular trigger. This one is more useful. When text box 1 lost focus, in other words, if someone is no longer is done typing and has moved on to other buttons and whatnot, this event will trigger. So this is a good time to do some processing. If you want to check if someone has entered a valid zip code, this would be a good time to do it. This is a good trigger to do validation. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the other action here. Call text box 1 hide keyboard. It is an action. How do I know it's an action?
Call.
What is the verb here?
Call.
Call is a verb, but it's also a programming concept. Hide, that's it. Okay. In this case, hide is the verb. It is going to hide the keyboard. Okay. It is an action that this particular object, the text box, can perform. Okay. And the rest are mostly set and gets. So you can change the width, you can get the existing width, and so on. Are there any questions about what is a method in apps programming, in App Inventor? No questions? Okay. Okay, can someone remind me again, what are the requirements of a method? If I say, blah, blah, blah is a method, it has to be associated with a class, an object first, and then an object, is a part, is an instance of a class. It is created from a class. Okay. All right. So we are pretty much done. I mean, even though the thumbnail doesn't show that we are done, we're actually pretty close to done, because the rest of this is really just a lot of screenshots showing you the stuff that I just showed you earlier, like that. The last part, is basically, indicating limitations of App Inventor. Because with a full object-oriented programming language like C++, C#, Java, and most of the other programming languages, you can define your own classes. But in App Inventor, you do not have the ability to define your own classes. So you're kind of stuck with whatever is supplied to you. You cannot make your own cookie cutter. Okay. It's a limitation, but for this class, for cisp362, it is okay. Okay. In cisp363, we'll learn how to define our own classes, because sometimes you want to extend what a particular class can already do, and you just say, oh, my special button blah is just like a regular button. It can do everything that a regular button can, but it has also this little thing that it can do that no other buttons can do. So you can extend a class so that you can have your own classes, you can have your own templates, your own cookie cutters to cut out your very special cookies. All right. Are there any questions at this point? Good. no questions at this point? Okay. If there are no questions at this point, what I'll do next is I'm going to introduce program logic elements in programming. Okay. Because last time I already checked, everybody here has either taken a programming class of some sort. It doesn't have to be cisp300. It can be cisc323, for bash scripting. It can be an ET class, with which language do they use in ET?
There's mainly proprietary stuff that's specific for whatever we're looking for.
Okay.
Whatever,
Basic stamp.
Basic stamp editor.
Okay.
Other chips that we've been working with.
Okay, but basic stamp has conditional statements,
Exactly.
It has loops, so it has all the basic elements of programming. So it can be a class like that, that will suffice, as a co-requisite for this class. So you can even be taking that class along with this class, and it will still be okay. It can be a web scripting class, if anyone has taken CISW 400, 410, 420, or even CISW 310, it has scripting elements in it, and those are programming code as well. So based on that assumption, what we'll do next is to start to introduce programming logic into our scripts. Okay? All right. And I'm switching back to the blocks editor here because at this point my program is empty. There's nothing in it. So even though my program can run, okay, you can look at my app here. It seems to be active. I can click buttons and I can type in a text box, but nothing is being processed regardless of what I do. Are we doing okay so far? Okay, so it is an app, as it is. You can upload it, you can even sell it. It's questionable whether anyone will buy it because it doesn't do anything, right? So we want to start to do something, and some of you have already started on your own to write your app already, and some apps I know is fairly complicated already. But I do want to kind of get into it, just kind of ease into it. In your CISP300 class, for those of you who are taking CISP300 at this point, I think last time that person indicated that conditional statements is covered already. So we'll start with conditional statements. Okay. So we'll start programming here, and then we'll say, conditional statements are built-in blocks. In other words, these are always here, regardless of what component you have selected and put into your application. The built-in blocks are always here. Okay? They are always here, and you can always put these into your program. A conditional statement is a control block because it controls the flow of the logic. Because you come in one way, and then there are two ways to proceed. There are two branches. And from here, you can see the if-else. That's the one that we want. Okay, so we put it into our main blocks editor screen here. And I know most of you cannot see it very well, so I'm going to zoom in so that we can see it a little bit better. Okay. What we'll do is we'll say, if the text box, has my name, we'll pop up a dialog box and say, you have, super user privileges or something like that. Okay, you can do stuff. And if it's not my name, then we'll just say, sorry, I can't let you do it. Is that okay? So fairly simple stuff. It's a condition to see whether I am the person, it is my name in the text box. All right? With every conditional statement, if then else, okay, there's always a condition. The condition is something that will evaluate to either true or false. So in this particular case, what type of operation should I use if I just want, if the text box is TAK, T-A-K, all lowercase, let's just make it all lowercase. I want the program to print out a message in a dialog box and say, TAK, you have root access. Okay.
Need to compare.
I need to compare. Okay, very good. Out of these drawers, which one do you think will contain comparison?
Logic.
Text.
Math.
It's either text or logic. Okay, so we'll take a look at text first. And if you look at text, sure enough, it has text equal. Tests whether the text strings are identical, that is, having the same characters in the same order. This is different from the equal, the ordinary equal, which is for numerical comparison. But how can that be? I mean, comparison is comparison. Why do we have one comparison for text, another comparison for numbers? Well, let me give you a very quick example to illustrate it. So let me start up a basically a notepad. Okay, it's called mousepad, but it's basically a notepad. Okay, so I want you to look at this number and look at this number here. Which one is a bigger number? Come on, it's not a trick question. 100 is bigger, right? 100 is a bigger number. In other words, if I place a $100 bill and a $20 bill on the table, and I say you can pick one of those two, you're gonna pick up the $100 bill, right? Because it's a it's a higher value. Well, if you compare these as numbers, then you'll be absolutely correct. Okay, 100 is a larger value. But when you compare this as text, then 100 is less than 20. That's because when you're comparing as text, you're comparing things one by one from left to right until there is a difference. Okay? I'm comparing this to this. Oh, I can tell the order right away. 1 is less than 2, and therefore 100 as a text string is less than 20 as a text string.
If you were to put zeros in front of the number, would it reclassify it and be able to recognize?
No, it will. If you put a leading 0 here, in other words, you have digit for digit type of matching, then the effect of text matching will kind of disappear because you have all the leading zeros, so that you have a direct comparison. Okay, we're comparing hundreds to hundreds, tens to tens, and ones to ones. But that's not how typically people write numbers.
No.
So you cannot rely on the leading zeros to help you out in this situation. So that's why we want to have two comparisons. One for text, which means I'm only comparing things one position at a time starting from the left, and the other one is for numerical comparison, which means I look at the entire thing, I look at the value it is representing, and then I do the comparison. Okay? So do we have any questions? No? I can see a lot of doubts. It's like, no, Tech, I don't know what you ate for breakfast, but this ain't true. It cannot be true, right? All right. So we're gonna have some tests here. Okay? We have 2 buttons. I just need one more text box, then we are ready to go. Okay, so I'm changing the program just a little bit to illustrate that point. So I just need one more text box here. I'm gonna stash it over here. And it is usually better to rename the text box and also the buttons because now they have actual purposes. So the first one, I'm gonna rename button 1 to text compare. Okay, so this is text compare. And the other one, I'm going to change it to number compare. Okay, so this is number compare. Oh, something is not right, Tack. The label, is not changing. Well, what I just did was I changed the name of the component, which is independent from its label that is displayed when you run the app. Okay, if I want to change that, I have to go to which pane should I go to change the text? The properties, or you can also just have code to do it. But I'm just going to go to properties here, go to text compare, and then change its text here to say compare as text. Go to the other one and then change that to compare as numbers. Okay. So now we have the actual buttons indicating what they're supposed to do. I can do the same thing about text box 1 and text box 2, but I'm just going to leave it the same as this. Okay. All right. Let me describe what I want to do. Okay. I want the user to be able to type something in text box 1 and then something else, possibly something else in text box 2. Click the button, the magenta button here, and it will indicate the result of comparing as text. If the user clicks compare as number, it will indicate the result of compare as numbers. Okay, sounds pretty simple, right? All right, so let's go ahead and do it. Okay. First question is, how am I going to trigger the code to execute? In other words, I want the, okay, let me go to the emulator at this point. I want the program to do something when I click this button. I want the program to do something else when I click this button here. What should I do to make that happen?
You need to use a method or action.
I need to use an action trigger, right? Okay, very good. I need to use an action trigger. And if I need an action trigger, which screen should I go to? This is the resources editor. It is only dealing with stuff that are fairly static. The blocks editor. Very good. Every time we want to specify action, we have to go to the blocks editor. Now within the block editor, this is no longer useful, so I'm gonna toss it into the trash can here. I have to go to my blocks because anything that is specific to a button, I have to go to the right button because it is a method of that particular button. So now I have number compare as a button, I have text compare as a button, and I can start with either one, doesn't matter which one I start with. Let's start with number compare. Okay, it has all the green ones are action triggers. In other words, when number compare dot click is an action trigger, whatever code you put inside that block is triggered or will start execute when the button is clicked. The second one is when the button gets focused. The next one is when I long click on the button. And the last one is when the button was focused and now it's losing its focus because somebody pressed the tab key or otherwise selected something else on the screen. So which one should I use if I just want the logic to occur when someone clicks it?
Click.
It's pretty obvious, right? All right, so we'll select this one, put it into my blocks editor, and now I can start to put some logic into this. Okay. But the first thing I might want to do, if this is like the first time I use App Inventor, maybe I just want to confirm that the action is in fact triggered when I click the button, that I have selected the right trigger. Okay. How do I do that?
Notify it.
Test it.
Use a
Build the app and then test it.
Use a notifier.
Use a notifier. I can also use some other action that is that is visible, like I can change the color of the button, or just invert it. Okay, so that's also obvious. But a notifier is something that I have to do anyway, so I might as well do it now. I go back to my resources editor, and I go to other stuff, drag a notifier into my app, and you can see the notifier doesn't get into the screen itself. It is known as a non-visible component. That means a notifier is not visible on the screen. Okay, it is one component that is just quote unquote sitting there, but it's not visible. You cannot do any type of actual interaction with it by itself. Okay, you can do some interaction when we say, oh, by the way, create a dialog box and then give me some buttons. This is a good time to pass the row sheet out. We're on the last column today. Okay, so just make sure you initial your name on the last column, and I'll pass it from here. Okay, all right. So now that we have a notifier, if I switch back to the blocks editor, I will see notifier 1 under my blocks, because remember, everything that you put into your viewer pane will have a drawer representing it in the blocks editor, so that I can now click notifier 1 and see what I can do with notifier, with a notifier, in this case specific to notifier 1. Okay, which one do you think I should use, so that it is obvious? I click a button, it pops up a message and say, hey, yes, this button is clicked.
Show message dialog.
Show message dialog. There are several message dialog boxes that you can show. I would just pick the simplest one. This one and this one are both fairly simple. Let's look at the description here. Display an alert dialog box with a single button. Shows a dialog box in which the user can enter text, after which the after text input event is raised. I just need this one here. I just need a confirmation and say, okay, I have read the message, and nothing else needs to happen. So I need to drag this one out. Okay. Right now, these two blocks are not connected at all. They are two separate blocks. I can click the button all I want. It's not going to trigger the dialog box to show up. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is to put the purple one inside the green one. Okay, I'm done. No. How do I know it's not done yet?
You need to connect.
Because you can see the green block is not circling, it's not including the purple block. Okay, so the way to do it is you have to make sure that this little tab here is matching this notch here. That's what you need to do. So you have to kind of align those two so they are matching. Then you release, and now we have the purple block or the blue block attached to as a component of the green block. Okay. Do you see the little exclamation point that is yellow? That means we have a problem. Okay, this code is not going to work for some reason. So what we'll do is we'll hover over this, and it shows this clump contains an empty socket and won't be sent to the phone. What empty sockets are we talking about?
Message, title.
All of these things here are sockets. It is expecting something to be plugged in to those sockets for it to work. Now, how do I know which socket does what for this particular block? Mouse over. Oh, or at least I thought it would do it. No, it does not. Okay, so
maybe mouse over the show message dialog. Notifier.show message.
It doesn't show the individual socket. It just shows the whole thing. And I thought it shows what each block is going to do. Okay. Well, anyway, the message is the message inside the box. The title is the title on the title bar, and the button text is what is appearing on the button. We actually did this on the first day, so I'm not sure how many of you actually remember that, but we actually did this on the first day already. So what I'll do is I'm gonna put some text here. How do I attach text, stuff that I want to say to these sockets?
Go to built-in.
You go to built-in, and because I'm dealing with text, that's the tab I want. And inside here you have all of these operations. I don't need anything that's fancy. I just need some text. So I'm just going to need the text thing here, and those are the things I'm going to attach to it. Now it looks kind of confusing here because it has text here as a text string, but the value is also just text. So this is the part that I can change. Okay, so here I can say compare as number as a button is clicked. Zoom out a little bit so you can see the entire thing. The title bar is just okay, just say pay attention, and the button text is I'll just say got it, let's continue. Okay, all right, so now we have three very distinct text pieces attached to the dialog box. I think most of you know which one should go where in the dialog box, but when we run this app, it will show us. Okay. I'm switching back to the emulator screen, and I'm going to click compare as number, and this is the dialog box that it pops up. Okay, the dialog box title is pay attention. Okay, I got something to tell you. The actual text inside is compare as number is clicked, which is indicating yes, we got into this block of code, and the button is labeled got it, let's continue, because when I click it, then it will disappear, and then we can continue any type of processing within that green block. All right. Do we have any questions at this point? No questions? Okay. When you compare two things, what are the possible outcomes from the comparison? Not exactly. When you're comparing, okay, think of it as a scale, right? Okay. So you got one thing on one side, you got another thing on the other side. So what are the possible outcomes when you release your hand and go, okay, scale, do your thing.
Less than, equal, or greater than.
Less than, equal, or greater than. Very good. So that's what we'll do too, okay? All right. So if you want to print out three different messages depending on whether it's equal, less than, or greater than, we need a conditional statement. Okay? So we'll go ahead and write our conditional statement. Go to control, go to if then else, and we'll just dash it here like that. And once again, we have an empty socket and won't be sent to the phone because, hey, guess what? We got this socket here that is empty. Okay. So let's say the first thing we want to check is whether they are exactly the same or not. So I'm just checking for equality, but as numbers, equality as numbers. Which built-in block or which drawer do you think I should select in this case? We know it's not text, logic. Okay, it's either math or logic. Okay, so we'll take a look at logic first. You're correct. Logic does have the equality check, so we'll stash it over here. Okay. It doesn't fix the problem. It's still showing, this clump contains an empty socket and won't be sent to the phone. What is empty? What is missing here? I have an empty scale. I need to indicate what is being compared to what else, right? How should I specify that? Okay, let's go back to the resources screen here, and we'll take a look at this and go, okay, but what am I comparing?
Text.
The content in the text boxes, right? Okay, so we switch back to here, and we say, but how do we specify the text in text box 1, and then we specify the text in text box 2? Which tab do you think I have to go to? Because my blocks, okay? They're in my blocks because they are specific to each object. Okay, so you go to my blocks here, and then we have text box 1. Inside text box 1, you have a lot of stuff here. But what we really need is really just the text, the content of text box 1, and it will fill up this notch just fine. We go to text box 2, scroll down to text box 2.text, and we stash it here. Okay, you can see the yellow exclamation point is gone because it is happy. But tag, we still got missing stuff here. What about the then do stuff, and what about the else do stuff? Well, those are actions that can be missing. So in this case, I have a conditional statement that has a condition to evaluate, which means it will go one way if they are the same and go the other way when they're different. It's just that I got nothing to do depending on either side. But that's perfectly okay. The app is valid. It just doesn't do anything useful. Are we still doing okay so far? Kind of? Okay. All right. So given this here, I'm going to change the program just a little bit. I'm going to put the conditional statement back in, but I'll put this one outside because depending on whether it is the same or not, I want to print a slightly different message just to test whether the program is working or not. And I cannot do a copy and paste. Let's see, can I copy? Yep, I can. Copy and paste.
Just copy paste?
Yep,
Select
just
it,
Control
copy,
C,
paste.
select, Control C, and then Control V, the usual keyboard shortcut. All right. That's not helpful because the two messages are the same. So I'm going to change the message itself and say, this is not just being compared, and I would just say, okay, just for now, I'm just going to say equal versus not equal. That's all I want to say because I just want to see whether it makes a difference or not. Okay. Have you noticed that I only do a little bit of programming and then I go back and test the program right away? Why do you think I did that? Sorry?
So you don't have to go all the way back and try to figure out what your error is.
Exactly. If I try to do a lot of stuff, and then I test the program again and it doesn't do what I think it should do, then I have to backtrack a lot of steps and say, okay, of the 20 things that I did, which one broke the program? If I only did like 2 things and then I test the program again and somehow the program now doesn't behave correctly, I only have 2 steps to backtrack. Okay, because it can only, hopefully it's only one of those two steps, because sometimes it's a little bit more complicated. All right, so I have my app ready to go at this point, and I'm going to my emulator and test it. Okay, so I'm gonna do the usual thing, the right thing first. I'll put a 0 here, I put another 0 here, and then I click compare as numbers, and it says equal. Excellent. Well, I'm not quite done testing the program yet because I want to see whether it can also detect when they are different. So I have a 0 and a 1 in this case. I click compare as numbers, and it says not equal. Excellent. That's exactly what I want. I'm going to put in something a little bit more different this time. So in the first box, I use a leading 0, and in the second box, I do not have a leading 0. If I click compare as numbers, what do you think should be the output of this program?
Not equal.
It should.
If it says text.
No, compare as numbers.
Oh, then
They should be the same because they are representing the same numerical value, even though they are they look different. So let's click it and see whether that works or not. Equal, it's all working. I got one more thing to do here. Oops. But what about this? 1 versus 1. 1 is spelled out, and 1 is numerical 1.
It's 0.
Yep, exactly. Anything that is not numerically as a number, when you try to evaluate it as a number, it is interpreted as 0. So in this case, it should not match. Even though 1 spelled out, is 1 to us, it's not to the computer. Compare as numbers, not equal. Oh, okay. What about uni? Yeah, not gonna. Uno, right? Uno. Okay. Okay, it's not gonna work. What about this? What about 0 versus 0? Now we have something that we have to think about, because I'm telling the program to consider each box as a number. Now 0 as a digit 0 is always 0. Okay, that's not a problem. It is 0 spelled out as 0. That can be a problem because it is not a number, but anything that is not a number is automatically recognized as the numerical value 0. So if I click compare as numbers, it tells me it is not equal. That's interesting. So that means 0 spelled out is not giving me a numerical value of 0 either. It's something else. Very good, but that's exactly what I want the program to do. All right. Next, we'll program compare as text. Well, we're not quite done yet because we are just, we have just done equality. We now want to say, okay, if it is not equal, what are the two possible cases? Greater than or less than. Very good. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll add that logic. What do I need again in order to distinguish the two and do two different things depending on whether they are equal and less than or not less than? If else, very good, a conditional statement. Okay, so we need another branch, another conditional statement. We go to built-in, go to control, drag and drop another conditional statement, and this time I put it inside the else of the first conditional statement, because this is something that I want to do only when they are not the same. Okay, are we doing okay so far? This is called nesting, which means I am putting a statement inside another statement, or in the terminology of App Inventor, I'm putting a block inside another block. Do we have a similar concept like this when, on our daily use of a computer? Something that can contain other things.
Browser?
Browser? Not quite. A file browser can show you something like that. Folders. Okay, when you use a computer, when you have to save your file and look for files, a folder can contain other folders. It's the same thing here. A conditional statement is like a folder, except it has two places to put stuff. But on each side, it can contain other things. All right. So we'll go ahead and specify less than in this case. Logic is not going to help in this case because this is just equality check. we'll probably have to go to math to look for less than. The equal is also here, but this time we just need a less than. And I want to see if I can probably not duplicate that block, so I'm just gonna go through this to look for the text of text box 1, stash it here, look for the text of text box 2, and stash it over here. Oh! That music is distracting me. Alright, so I'm going to take this one out because I want to Control C and copy and paste it. So now I have 2 more copies of the notifier box showing a dialog box. So right here I would change my text to less than, and then here I would change my text to not less than. Well, if it is not equal to and not less than, what is the conclusion?
Greater.
Has to be greater than. Okay. Alright. Okay, so let's test our program again. And this time, let's try the usual stuff first, okay? Something. Okay, so we have 1 and 0. And since I'm comparing text 1 to text 2, this one should say greater than. Okay, excellent. If I change this one to 2, it should say less than. And whatever worked before should still work. So if they're both 1s, they should say equal to. The question now is, what if I spell this one out as 1? So it is not numerical. What do you think? Let's give it a try. Okay. Well, it actually gives me a very good result here. It says bad argument to less than because 1 is not a numerical value. It cannot be compared. Okay, that's very good. The program actually gave me an error message at the right time, and it ends the application. It's basically an exception, and that's the right thing to do. All right, very good.
You need to use this number. You need to check this number.
Yeah, you have to check whether it's a number first,
Yeah.
and that's a built-in block too. Okay, very good. And to test whether something is a number is down. It's either here. It's a number. There we go. So if we want to rule out and say, hey, you did not even give me a number to compare, that's the last block here. It's a number question mark. It's going to return a value that is either true or false. So I can use that to say, if you don't give me a number, I don't even bother to compare as number because it doesn't make any sense to compare as a number. All right, so are we doing okay so far with this program at this point?
Okay.
Yep.
That is a number. Would you put that prior to the text box 1 text and the text box 2 text?
Yeah, I would do it, way before. The first thing I do is to check whether text box 1 and text box 2 both contain numbers, because if at least 1 is not a number, I'll just print out an error message and say I'm not going to bother with the rest. Okay, let's do that. Okay, because I want to show you guys how do you add error checking after a program is already half constructed. So let's go ahead and do that too. Okay, so we'll go ahead and introduce another if-then block here. If-then else. All right, and then what we need to do is to put this entire conditional statement into the else portion, because we only want to continue to do the actual comparison after confirming text box 1 and text box 2 are containing numerical values. Okay, so now we have to use the test here. I am going to use a single test to check both text boxes. But that seems kind of impossible, because if you look at math and go to is a number, it can only compare one thing at a time. I can either confirm text box 1 is a number or not, or confirm text box 2 is a number or not, but I cannot combine the results of 2. Okay? So what do I need to combine the two?
You need and.
I need a logical operator. Okay, the logical operator is, I'm looking for invalid input here because if the input is invalid, I'm going to print out the message and then be done with it. So in this case, I'm looking for a logic operation called OR. Okay, because I'm looking for both of these are going to be is a number, is thing a number. Okay, come on, click. There we go. It's not clicking. Okay, maybe it's waiting for me to select the text first. Okay, so I'm gonna select the text of text box 1 first. All right, so this one is happy. Can I make a second one now?
Same like last class.
Yeah.
Same problem.
So maybe it's an internal glitch. Okay, save the program first. Close the blocks editor and then try it again. So if you see a similar problem with your program, like something won't attach correctly, just save it first, close the blocks editor, and then reopen the blocks editor, and hopefully that will change. Save. And there we go. All right, let's give it a try and try to reattach it. Ah, okay, this time it works. Unlike most programming languages where you can only specify 2 things for the OR operation to work, because it is graphical, you can now actually attach as many things as you want to the OR. So it becomes A or B or C or D and so on. It's just not as tedious because if you only allow 2 things for the OR, then you need a second OR to have 3 things to be ORed and so on. So this is just a handy way to do things, but it's not absolutely required. So I go to text box 2 and then scroll down to the text property of text box 2, attach it to the second is a number, is thing a number, basically that's what it's asking. And then this becomes my test condition of the outermost conditional statement. Okay. It's still complaining something is not attached.
Don't we need to put that in the if do instead of the if else?
Sorry?
Your second if else, doesn't that need to be the if do? So if it is a number, then you want to do this.
Yeah, the outermost one is checking whether it is invalid or not.
Yes, but then your second if else statement,
Yeah.
shouldn't that be moved up
Yeah.
into the if then?
No,
do?
no, it's the.
Right. So
Oh, okay. This one needs a negation too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, you're right. Okay, I need a
Or you
negation.
can use and.
Hmm?
You can use
Or I
and.
can use an and move the other one up. Yep, either one will work. So I just need a not, another not. So if the first box is not a number and the second box is not the second box is not a number, I'm going to print an error message. So I go back to my blogs, notifier 1, go to show text dialog box, and stash it here. And then go to text, text. Oh, cancelable. Okay, never mind. I used the wrong block. Okay, back to notifier 1. This is the one that I want. There we go. All right. Okay. Control C, Control V, Control V. One down there. Okay, there we go. So this time the title of the title bar is going to say alert, and the the message is going to be, I can only compare numbers, and then the button is going to say, go back and try again. Alright. It's still complaining that I have one block that is not, one socket that is not filled yet. It has to do with this one.
No, I don't.
It's not doing that on my computer. It's not doing that on my computer. It doesn't say that.
It's not doing that on your computer?
Maybe something just looks like it's in place, but it's not.
Well, if they're not attaching it, it won't move the entire block with it.
I think you've got a hidden text box.
Yeah, move
Sorry?
notifier 1, the first one, just moved around.
This one?
Yeah. There you go.
Nope, that's not it.
Uh,
I can have floating blocks around that doesn't do anything. It doesn't cause the program not to
Yeah.
compile.
You can check
Oh,
the last one.
right click and organize.
Right click.
Yeah, right click. Just on the, and organize all blocks. I'll look around to see if there's any extra stuff.
No, I'm not seeing any.
Why not just put true in the last test before?
I think it might just pop up another socket. It doesn't end it. Actually, I need a false here, not true, because if it with a disjunction, if you put a true
yeah.
anywhere, the whole thing becomes true all the time. So if I need to fix this, I can put a false into this position, and it just opens up a new block.
No.
So that's not it either.
Just save. Try to
It
save.
doesn't tell you. What does it say when
Save?
you hover over
Yeah.
it?
Wait a
Yeah, what does it say when you hover over it?
Does it say anything when you hover over the exclamation point?
Say again?
The alert? Does it say anything when you hover over?
It just says, something, a clump has an unspecified socket.
I've got mine set up the way you do, but I'm not getting the little exclamation mark.
It just doesn't like me.
Just click out.
See if you have anything under all your code, just move the whole thing, like the number compare click.
Oh, organize would have put everything.
Okay,
visible.
now, so this is a good thing to, this is a good thing to happen, because now I can actually show you guys how I would do the troubleshooting, because I cannot know which block is responsible for this. So what I'll do is I'm going to take this whole block away, not toss it into the trash can, but I will just substitute this block with a simple true or false. It doesn't matter. Okay, so the problem is still here. So that means the original problem has nothing to do with this disjunction. It's somewhere else. So I'm troubleshooting step by step here, and this one seems to be just fine. Let's try this one. Okay, that seems to be okay. That seems to be okay. That seems to be okay. Everything looks good, but it's not. Something is not right.
Remove the entire if else and see if it goes away.
This one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still there.
It's still there. Okay.
If you run
So-
it, does it run?
Alright. So what I will do is I'm gonna close this again and start it again. Okay, it's time for a bug report. I'm gonna send a link to my lecture recording and then indicate the start time and then send it over to MIT. And it's still there. It's sticky. Alright. Well, there's a way to fix that.
Trash it.
Trash it and do it all over again. Just the outer block. I don't want to do the whole thing all over again. So we'll just put this one here and then stash this over here. Hey, guess what? Everything is cool now. Okay. Well, but now you know if you encounter a similar problem, this is how you're gonna fix it. Let's see, my emulator is still around, so I can still attach to it. Yep, there we go. All right. So this program is getting a little bit more complicated each time. So now it has checking first. Okay, if I give it a non-number, it won't even bother to do the comparison. So let's go ahead and switch to the emulator. It's still uploading, but it will be there soon. There you go. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna try that feature out first. 1 and 2. And then compare as numbers, and it says, I can only compare numbers. Go back and try again. Very good. Now, am I done testing? Well, I could have made a mistake, and it always reports that problem, right? So whenever you add a feature that has a branch, you don't just test one branch. You always have to test both branches. Okay. So I got to go back here and test it with actual numbers in this case, and make sure that I did not break anything that was working before. Okay, that's working fine. Okay, very nice. Are there any questions about this app at this point, other than the fact that it has a lot of dragging and dropping? No questions?
Okay.
Yep.
Is there a way to view this in script? So you can actually view the programming language behind the blocks?
I am not aware of any way to do that. What happens is, this block here, all of these are represented internally by some internal data structure that has nothing that we can read. It is sent back to the MIT server, and that server is responsible to parse it and to process it and turn it into actual Java bytecode to send back to the Android emulator.
That's what I was wondering if we could actually see the actual Java code.
You can turn it into APK if you want to.
You can save the project to your computer, and I
Yep.
think there's some converters that will convert it into Java,
Yeah.
Okay.
but they're not from the same people.
Okay. All right, let's do that. Okay, so I'm just curious as to how to do it. So I'm going to give it a try. So save it first. Go back to my projects. You guys know this step already because you need this step to turn in your program. So we'll go ahead and download source as a zip file. I'm going to put it into my download folder. Save it. And I can just click the zip file to open it up. Maybe. Okay. It doesn't show me what the content is. I'm going to go to the folder and do it manually.
Yeah, it won't be anything useful. You have to run it through a converter first. But you can see it's...
Well, at least I can take a look at test. Okay, so here we have screen.block and screen.scm, and the first thing I would do in Linux is to use the command called file. Okay, the file command is really quite useful because it does not use the extension to tell you what kind of a file it is. It actually looks at the content of the file and make a guesstimate of what it is. So I would run this first and try to assess what is the BLK file. And it's very generic. It's an SGML, is a markup language kind of file, kind of similar to XML. And I'll take a look at the second one, which is SCM. And this one is just an ASCII text file with very long lines. All right, so knowing that, I will go ahead and take a look at the BLK file, because if it's a markup language, I can at least tell something in it. It shows here that the document type is YA code blocks. Okay, so that is good because that tells me the document type is somewhat published. Okay, so I can now use the search engine to look for YA code blocks. Okay, YA code blocks. And we have code blocks, which is not what we want.
Search instead for.
Sorry?
It adjusted your search.
You mean here? Yeah. Okay, let's go back to the other one. Okay, App Inventor for Android.
Java language string code.
Sorry?
That's it. Oh, it's
I'll look it up and find out next time. So I'll look up and say and try to see whether we can make some sense out of that file. If I just look at the text here, let's see if we can make any sense out of it. It's really hard because it has no indentations. So without indentations, it's really hard to see which block is containing which other block. One way to basically look at this as a real XML file with all the indentation is to use Firefox. I'm not sure whether it will display it as the way it is. Give it a try. If a file has an extension, no, it doesn't do that. Let me change the extension to XML and use Firefox to look at it again. And this time it does use the indentation. So this gives you a general idea of what it looks like. It's kind of cryptic because it is specifying connectors to specify which block is actually connected to which other block logically. So to read this as text is kind of complicated because we are not, it's not visual at all.
That's probably where your bug was.
Somewhere in here is messed up. Yep. But it's persistent, so that means it is already saved with that bug contained. So I'm not going to spend too much time today on this topic, but that's a good question. I'm kind of curious.
Well, because for example, I don't know Java at all, but for learning standpoint, to build something small and then look at it in the Java sense and go, oh, cool, that's what I did.
But the problem is it may not even have, it does not even use Java as an intermediate.
No, I know. I'm saying
language.
if it's able to do
Right.
that'd be great.
That would be great.
Plus, whether it's readable or not is a different matter altogether.
Yeah.
Whether the generated code is
Yeah.
readable, unless they spend a lot of time to optimize it. A lot of times, it should be fairly readable, except for the variable names. Those will be automatically generated. So they will say var and then have a big string of numbers next to it. But I'll look into it because I'm curious too. I'm curious as to whether we can convert the graphical program representation into its actual Java code or not. But there's one more file in here.
Properties file.
It's the resources file, right? And it's what? Young Android. Nope, that's not it. It's the other file. It's in source. It's Young Android project. Okay, so there we go. The properties of the project. Let's take a look at that file. It's pretty simple. It is just a inventory of where the assets are. I think the assets are the resources, the source, the build. So nothing here that is really indicating anything that is useful. So I'll have to spend some time to look at dig it up and see whether I can find something. All right. So we are running out of time for today's lecture. So we are starting to actually put some programming elements into the program. So I'm hoping that most of you can follow that. I will take a look at your project proposal today. It might take me a little more than one day to kind of give you the feedback, and then we'll have project proposal 2 for most of us. For some people, maybe the proposal 1 is good enough and you're set. Okay, but if I have any major feedback and you have to make changes, then we'll have proposal 2 before we kind of settle on the proposal itself. Okay. Any other questions related to the tool or the topics that we have gone through so far? Okay, so let me answer your question first, and then you.
So in other words, we don't have any homework next week.
At this point, we don't have any homework, but you're more than welcome to use the interface to kind of start writing some code, especially if it is related to the project that you want to pursue. I'm not going to ask you to rethink your entire project. I just need to refine what you state, or basically say, okay, this feature may be a little bit difficult to implement. You might want to consider an alternative. Okay, but it is a good time to get started with the actual coding of your project if you want to. Let me answer your question first.
Another app creators not use App Inventor, just use Visual Basic and convert that into an app.
No, not in this case.
Not probably in the world outside this class.
Oh, outside of this
So
class.
other people not use App Inventor, create apps just with Visual Basic.
Not for the Android.
For Windows Phone.
Yeah,
Or
Visual
iOS.
Basic. Visual Basic only runs in Windows platforms or Windows Microsoft products. So for iOS, it has its own programming language called Objective-C, which is a whole new big can of worm.
The only way that you can program apps for Apple is if you get the iOS SDK, and you have to be a partner.
You have to
Apple.
pay for that too,
Yeah,
right?
you have to be the app developer under Apple App Development Agreement.
I think that's like $100 or something.
Yeah.
It's $100.
$100 a year.
Oh.
Oh, is it a year?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you just pay $100 and you're set, and it's not
You
too
have to
bad.
Well, your license only lasts so long. And when you buy the SDK, you get a license for it. You have
Okay.
to renew that license every
Well, it's Apple. They milk everything.
Yeah.
Microsoft.
But to answer your question, the answer is no. Visual Basic, the only platform I can think of that can be programmed using Visual Basic would be Windows 8 tablets, because that's a Microsoft product.
Windows Phone.
Windows Phone. Okay, so Windows 8 phone, Windows phones, those may. I'm not even sure that Visual Basic will run, but it does.
For
Okay.
2013 maybe.
Okay, so you can.
Visual Studio.
Okay, so we can develop Visual Basic and C#. With Microsoft, that's one interesting thing. All of their different programming languages will compile to the same backend.
Yeah.
So whether it's C# or Visual Basic or whatever language they put up on the front, they still compile to the same bytecode in the backend. So it will still work on whatever platform they're intended for. So to answer your question, the answer is it is platform dependent. If it's a Microsoft a Microsoft tablet or phone platform, yes, you can use Visual Basic, but none of the other two platforms are programmable using Visual Basic. All right, well, thanks for the information. Yep.
Is there an emulator you could load that would solve that problem?
To solve the problem,
Like an Android emulator.
like
for
running
iPhone,
Visual
vice
Basic
versa?
programs on an Android? None that I know.
And the second question, can your application be too large? Is there a size limit to the
App
code
Inventor?
Yeah.
The only problem is, we encounter, sometimes it has glitches, so you have to close that screen and then start it over again, or something that we just saw. Okay, we solved the problem, but it is sticky. It doesn't want to say yes, the problem is fixed. So you might encounter those issues too. But I'm gonna file some bug reports today and let MIT know about it.
How large will your most applications end up being?
I